All right, guys, in Unit 5, we were talking about solving inequalities, and in Unit 5, Section 1, we're talking about solving inequalities using addition or subtraction. So before we actually worry about solving them, we need to look at a couple definitions. So the first definition is an inequality. An inequality is formed by placing an inequality symbol between two expressions. So if you remember an equation, it was formed by placing an equal sign between two expressions. An inequality just means we're putting an inequality symbol between two expressions. So if you look, there's an example for you right here. Y plus 5 is less than or equal to negative 6 is an example of an inequality. The solution of an inequality is all the numbers that produce true statements when you substitute them for the variable. So again, going back to equations, the solution of equation was the one number that when you plugged it in for the variable, it created a solution. For an inequality, we're talking about all the numbers greater than something or less than something. So there's multiple numbers that produce the outcome we're looking for. So the next thing we're going to do is look at graphing inequalities. This will also show you a couple different kinds of inequalities that we have, or the four inequality symbols that we have. So this first inequality, when you read it from left to right, it says x is greater than 2. So to graph this, I'm going to put 2 on my number line. And then since it's greater than, I'm going to put an open circle. And I know that the greater numbers are to the right. So to graph x is greater than 2, I'd put an open circle on 2 and then draw an arrow to the right. Going over to the right, we have x is less than 2. So again, I would put 2 on my number line. I'd have an open circle. And now that it's less than, I would go to the left. Because my less than numbers, my lower numbers are to the left on the number line. Example number 3 says x is greater than or equal to 2. So the difference here is that now my circle is going to be filled in. Greater than means I'm going to the right. So if you look at the difference between 1 and 3, number 1 is x is greater than, number 3 is x is greater than or equal to. The equal to part means that I shade in that circle. So for example number 4, I have x is less than or equal to 2. That means at 2 on the number line, I'm going to have a closed in circle, and we're going to go to the left.
Hey guys, it's Riley, your fave. Okay, bye.
Sorry, everyone, that was a guest appearance from Riley Phillips. So again, if you look at the difference, if it's greater than or less than, it's an open circle. If it's greater than or equal to or less than or equal to, it's a closed circle. Anytime it's greater than, we're pointing our arrow to the right. Anytime it's less than, we're pointing our arrow to the left. The next thing we're going to look at is writing inequalities, which can be kind of tricky. So if you have any issues, make sure you ask your teacher. But it says the directions say write an inequality to represent the situation or verbal sentence. So our first example is a boat must be at least 24 feet long. So the first thing we need to do is pick a variable. Since we're talking about a boat, I'm going to choose B as my variable. You can use whatever you want. Then I also know that I'm going to have 24. Now I need to add in my inequality symbol. So again, my choices are greater than, less than, greater than or equal to, or less than or equal to. So number 1 says a boat must be at least 24 feet long. At least tells me that it has to be greater than or equal to. Number 2 says 9 plus a number is less than 14. So I have 9 plus a number, and then I know I'm going to have 14. This one's pretty straightforward. It says is less than, so I'm going to plug in that inequality symbol. Number 3 says a golfer's longest drive is 325 yards. I'm going to use D as my variable because we're talking about a drive, and then we know we have 325. It says a golfer's longest drive. So the longest drive is 325, which means it could be 325 or anything lower than that. So I'm going to put less than or equal to as my inequality. Number 4 says 6 minus 18 plus a number is greater than 25. This one's a lot like 2. It's pretty straightforward. It tells me greater than, so I'll put in the greater than inequality symbol. Moving on to the next section, it says checking possible solutions. The directions say tell whether the given number is a solution of negative 8 is greater than negative 17 plus x minus 14. So we've been checking solutions every time we solved equations, or every section where we've solved equations. We're going to do the same thing, just to be a little bit different because we have an inequality now. So checking the solution means that I'm going to go ahead and rewrite my inequality and just plug in negative 23 for x. So when I work this out, I'll get negative 8 is greater than negative 17 plus negative 23 is negative 40 minus 14. Negative 40 minus 14 is negative 54. So I've done working it out. Now I just need to read it from left to right and see if it's a true statement. So this says negative 8 is greater than negative 54. That is a true statement. Negative 8 is greater than negative 54. So I can just write yes or put a check mark, whatever you want. But that is a solution. Negative 23 is a solution to that inequality. Let's try another example. So our second example is 23 we're going to plug in for x. So again, I rewrite. I plug in 23 for x. So negative 17 plus positive 23 is positive 6. And positive 6 minus 14 is negative 8. Now I read from left to right. It says negative 8 is greater than negative 8. That is not a true statement. They're equal to each other. So this would not be a solution. If you look at the back side of your notes, there's two more problems. There's number 3, which is 0, and number 4, which is 25, where you're plugging them in for x to see if there's solutions. I went ahead and rewrote the equation at the top of this page so you don't have to flip back. I'm going to leave those two for you to try. Make sure you check in with your teacher if you have any issues with those. So moving on to the next section, we're actually going to now solve inequalities either using addition or subtraction. Now this is exactly the same as solving equations, except we have an inequality symbol instead of an equal sign, but the steps are still the same. So the directions say to solve the inequality and then graph your solution. So for number 1, we have m plus 8 is greater than or equal to 12. Just like when I solved equations, I'm going to go to the side with the variable. M is on the left side. Over on the left side, I have m plus 8, so I need to move that positive 8 to the other side. So to undo that addition, I'm going to subtract 8 from both sides. So those cancel each other out, and I'll get m is greater than or equal to 4. And that's my final answer. Again, from left to right, that reads m is greater than or equal to 4. What that means is that any number 4 or bigger than 4 would be a solution to this inequality. Now, the directions also say to graph your solution. So I need to go ahead and draw a number line. I need to put 4 on that number line. We're saying that m is greater than or equal to 4. So the equal to part tells me to fill it in. The greater than part says I'm going to go to the right. Looking at number 2, I have negative 45 is greater than or equal to g minus 16. I go to the side with the variable. G is my variable. It's on the right side. I'm subtracting 16 on that right side. So to undo that, I'm going to add 16 to both sides. Negative 45 plus 16 is negative 29. On the right side, they cancel each other out. So I have negative 29 is greater than or equal to g. This is technically a right answer, but when I write inequalities, I always want to have the variable first. So if I write this in terms of my variable g, I would write g is less than or equal to negative 29. Since I flipped the order, I flipped the g to the front, I also need to flip the inequality symbol. Now I write g first because it's going to make it a lot easier to graph that. So now when I go to graph my solution, I put negative 29 on the number line. I know that g is less than or equal to negative 29. So the equal to part tells me to fill in the circle. The less than part tells me to go to the left. All right, looking at another example, coming down to number 3. It says x minus 8 minus 11 is less than negative 15. So the first thing I need to do is combine like terms on the left side because negative 8 and negative 11 are like terms. So I'm going to go ahead and rewrite this. X minus 19 is less than negative 15. Again, I combine like terms first. Go to the variable side. I'm subtracting 19, so to undo that, I need to add 19 to both sides. Those will cancel out, so I'll wind up with x is less than positive 4, and that'll be my solution. Now to graph that, I would put 4 on the number line. It's x is less than 4. There's no equal to part, so I'm going to have an open circle Less than tells me to draw my arrow to the left. All right, I had to clear out some room to get number 4 in here, but I have 13 is less than. If you look at the right side, I have like terms I need to combine. So negative 6 plus 23 is 17 plus x. Over on the right side where the variable is, I'm adding 17 to x. So to undo that positive 17, I need to subtract 17 from both sides. 13 minus 17 is negative 4, and that's going to be less than x. Now we said we want to rewrite this so that the variable comes first. So if I write x first, that means this inequality needs to flip to greater than negative 4. Again, I flip that so that it's easier to graph. I can read it left to right and say x is greater than negative 4. So I put negative 4 on the graph. It's greater than, but not equal to, so it's an open circle, and then greater than tells me to go to the right. At the bottom of this page, there's some challenge problems on there. They're called literal equations because there's only letters, there's no numbers. You're solving these little equations for x. Just do your best, and then if you have questions, go over those with your teacher. All right, that's it for Unit 5, Section 1 notes.